Got it.
We're live. So Randy's not here with us today, so I had to go ahead and try to emulate his absolute perfection that he's created with the We're Live catch line there to get us started. Randy is with his daughter, Brooke. She is playing softball today, so it's opening day of softball season for Brooke. So we're cheering her on from afar. Hopefully everything goes well, and I am sure. I don't know, what's the weather back home, Brian? Is it nice?
I mean,
today?
it's nice, beautiful, sunny. Probably about 75 right now. I'm gonna tell you, Kyle, that was pretty good, but it's not.
Did I nail it? No, I should have done it. I should have done it in my Dr. Phil voice.
Yeah, that would have been better.
We're live.
There you go.
So welcome everybody to episode number 8. My friend Sue Saller is with us today. So after we share our wins for the week, did I say wins there to start? Boy, I think I really have a problem. You should see how many times I re-record reels and stuff like that, just because I say words wrong. I don't know what's going on in my brain sometimes, but so we'll go ahead and we're going to share our wins for the week, and then shoo. Geez, man, I'm struggling. I don't know if I've had
take a breath, brother.
Caffeine.
Take a breath.
I don't know if I've had too much caffeine or not enough caffeine, but yeah, either way, something's going on. So anyway, Sue will then share her background with us, and then we're going to get into a great conversation from there, and then wrap up with our 3 questions that we always ask at the end. So who wants to get us started? How about Brian? Brian, what is your one big win, a couple small wins? What's been going on this week?
It's been a pretty busy week. I would say that one of the small wins is from the old W-2. We had a pretty successful day yesterday at work, which was a positive. We've been in a bit of a slump, so that was helpful.
Would you sell like 15 quads yesterday? What happened?
Nah, 1, but 15 would have been fantastic.
I'll be up there eventually buying a side-by-side from you. Hopefully not too far in the future.
Yeah, I would love to see you up there. I mean, it'd be an honor to sell you one, make some money off of you finally. No,
I want the best deal. Yeah, the best deal you got, brother. Hook me up.
That's called MSRP with an added 10%. No, that's just a small win. That's always good. But I'd say my big win for the week is my boy's mom and I had a conversation at our drop off earlier in the week, and there's a little bit of closure there. I think a little bit of finding some common ground, and we're going into court on Tuesday. After our conversation, I have a bit of a better outlook on things, and I am truly excited to see that the two of us will work together as adults in the best interest of our kids. So for a long time, that was not a thing, but it seems to be now. So hopefully that stays true, and that'll just be another win week after week, and the kids will prosper, and life will go on. So I'm chalking that up as a bit of gratitude for the week.
Absolutely. Keep leaning into that emotional intelligence. That's definitely, going to be anytime you're going through something like that. So, we'll get into this later, but all 3 of us on this call. So Brian currently going through this process, Sue and myself have gone through it in our past about the same time frame, Sue. So first of all, I want to clarify, my ex-wife is an absolutely amazing person. Never had any negative things to say about her. I was just, oh man, I was a terrible human being. I was immature. There was a lot that went into that, but she was amazing. But I went through a divorce about 6 years ago. Man, has it been that long? Yes, 6 years ago. And Sue was right in that same time frame. So we'll get into that. Brian, thanks for sharing that with us. And again, you leaning into that emotional challenge or emotional intelligence is going to be huge. I know it was for me back then, and I lacked it greatly. And you're a lot further along in that process than I am. So, Sue, what about yourself? What are some wins for the week?
Oh, small steps, big wins.
Yeah, exactly. It's perfect.
I've heard of that.
Yeah,
listen to that.
That's a really good podcast, by the way. Small steps,
sounds
big
like
wins
a great
podcast.
Yeah.
Before you start, Sue, I got to tell you, I listened to the episode you posted this morning with Roman. I had a conversation with Kyle. I don't know what it was, if it was a scenario, the setting this morning, listening to him talk about the Iron Man stuff, his growing up over in Ukraine. It was awesome. I loved it.
Thank you.
Awesome
yeah,
stuff.
He was
you guys
so
haven't
much
heard it,
fun.
check it out.
Yeah, he was so much fun to interview. I love it. So big wins. Well, I had an opportunity cross my path this week that could change my life trajectory. I can't really say too much more than that, but in the background, it's a big win. And that was a really big deal that crossed my path this week. And I think the other win is I have been meaning to get to start a coaching business for an educational coaching business to help people create courses. Because I have such a vast education background, I finally yesterday got the website, got my page on my website. I'm still tweaking it, but the page got done yesterday. So that was my big win.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Very
Great.
cool.
Congratulations on that. And
Thank you.
yeah, so Sue and Brian and we're all in the same space. And that's the best part. When you have this network around you of people who are in the same space as you, and obviously how we approach coaching is different. So we have Lena, who's a friend, who's a coach, Patrick in the group, who's a coach, a bunch of great people in the arena. But we're cheering each other on and we're supporting each other, even though we're in the same space. There's so much to go around, and the best part is to have that network around you, supporting you, cheering you on, showing you what's possible, and all of us going through it together. So that's awesome. That's a huge win.
Hey, coaching's a big umbrella.
Right.
There's a lot. You go to a coach for a particular thing. Like mine is in the education space, so I'm just actually really niching it down really small.
Yep.
So you just get coaches for different reasons.
Yeah, and that's the best thing.
So,
that's
that's
a
the beauty
great
of it.
point. Yeah, and it's like, we started and we were originally, I was trying to emulate other coaches, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I wasn't being myself with it. And I'm looking at the ideal skills, and I'm thinking, which one of these 5 things is my superpower? And it's discipline. Hands down, 100%, it comes down to discipline. And the best part about focusing on the discipline aspect is becoming more intentional takes discipline, becoming more emotionally intelligent, it takes discipline. So if we focus on the foundation of everything else, then those other things will come with time, and we'll weave those into what we're doing. But it makes it so much easier from a coaching framework standpoint to say, hey, this is what I do. If you want to become more disciplined, you want to become relentlessly consistent, come see me and we will work on that. So like you said, being niche and having that very specific focus, I think it is so important. So that's awesome, again, that you're on that journey now, and excited to see where that goes for you, and excited to be a part of it. I'm sure we'll be talking about it plenty throughout our conversations as well. So I can go ahead and share so I have 3 wins this week, and I'll start with the biggest win from an emotion standpoint. One of my clients, Nicole Lanigan, hopefully you get to listen to this episode. Nicole and I have known each other since I was 14 or 15. Her brother and I were best friends back in high school. And her and I have stayed in touch through all of these years. So I'm 36 years old now. So 21 years, Nicole and I have known each other. And she made an absolutely incredible post about what happened this week. So she had committed to 3 45-minute workouts this week. Friday, she was supposed to get her 3rd in. It didn't happen. Saturday morning, I text her, and she was not happy with me because it was early in the morning. But at the same time, that it was exactly what she needed in that moment, was just that reminder, like, hey, let's go, let's get after it. Stop making excuses. There is no other time than the present if you want consistency and you want results. So she made a huge, long, awesome post, and it was just incredible, because that is what it's all about. To see people change and develop this discipline and stop living the way that they were, and the way now starting to live the way that they want to, that is all I need out of all of this. It's absolutely incredible. So that was win number 1. Win number 2 was my 10-mile ruck march that I did on Monday for Memorial Day. So 10 miles, it took me just under 3 hours, 50 pounds on my back. I only stopped 4 really quick times, less than a minute each time, to chug some water and take some electrolyte tablets, because it was hot, it was humid. And Callie finished out. She came out with me the last mile, because I wasn't sure at that point if I was gonna be able to finish. But that was huge. I finished. I did it under 3 hours, which was my goal. And I've been paying for it every day since. So my ankle has been messing with me, but I didn't let that stop me. I ran on Tuesday, I ran on Wednesday, I ran on Thursday, I walked on Friday, I ran yesterday, and I did all of my workouts in between all of those things. And here's the thing, my ankle feels fine now. So I wasn't injured. I knew I wasn't injured. I knew I was hurt, but I just kept grinding. So many times in past in my life, I would have quit. I wouldn't have done that or taken it easy. And guess what? My ankle would have been about the same that it is right now, and I wouldn't have been further along, but I progressed through that pain. So obviously, if you're injured, don't do that. And maybe what I did was stupid, but that's how I live. And if it doesn't work for you, that's fine too. But that's where we're at. And then lastly, third win, we got an offer accepted on a house back home. And ironically, it's in the exact same neighborhood that we just moved out of, and where now that house is a rental property. So this will be our third home.
Those poor neighbors.
I know, right? Well, we're in a different section of the neighborhood. So we're like in the back now. They stuck us in the back, but super stoked for that. So if you would have asked me a couple years ago if I would now own, it'll be just around $750,000 of real estate. And the goal for next year will be to break the $1 million mark. I would have never even, that would have blown my mind, because a couple years ago I owned $180 or $180,000 worth of real estate. So it's amazing how your life can change by becoming more disciplined, becoming more intentional, surrounding yourself with the right people. And that's exactly why we're here and why we do what we do. So, but that's enough about me. But it sounds like we've all had a pretty good week overall. And now I'm stoked to get into Sue's background. So Sue, start us at the beginning and kind of take us through to what you got going on today. And, we'll stop and ask some questions that pique our curiosity. You ready to get after it?
For air. Yeah, I'm ready to get after it. And, I'll try and give you the Cliff Notes version because, I have to throw it out there. I'm 51, right? So when you hit the half century mark, you kind of have life behind you and quite a bit of it. So I'll try and make my story somewhat compact, but I'm sure you'll figure out what to do with it.
We'll dig in there.
We want to know it all, Sue.
Oh, okay. All right. Well,
let it rip.
I'll be really careful. Because I could talk the whole time and I won't. I'm a podcaster too, and we like to talk. We like to ask questions, but we like to talk too. So I have to give a shout out. I was born in northeastern Pennsylvania in Wilkes-Barre, and I have to say that because I still feel like I'm from there, even though I moved at 7. From there, people still ask me where I'm from. I say Wilkes-Barre, PA. Then we went down. My parents and I have one younger sister. We moved to Lower Bucks County, which is about 1 hour northeast of Philadelphia. So I grew up in that area, going into Philly when I could. The train station was there. We'd take it right in. So I'm familiar with the city. And I lived there till 89 and went to college at Penn State University. My childhood, I'll touch on it really quick because it does weave itself into my story. It was less than eventful. My parents did the best they could, but most of my life was kind of spent alone. I was that kid that was picked on. I was awkward. I wore glasses, fat, smart. I had that classic bullseye for bullying. That was me. So when I went home wasn't really cohesive and loving per se. I don't remember my parents being affectionate in any way. So you hear people talk about their upbringing. It's like, oh yeah, my mom was my biggest cheerleader, and my parents loved each other and stuff. Pretty much, I don't remember a whole lot going on. I pretty much remember being alone. And, it's my perspective, right? My parents might have a different perspective, but that was my perspective. But out of it, what was really interesting is, I was left to figure out life pretty much myself. And honestly, if anybody has kids, listening, don't let your kids figure out life themselves. You have to give them some moral backgrounds and upbringing. So when I had my own children years later, I'll get into this a little bit too. I homeschooled them, and I made it a point to be an involved parent. I made it a point to train them intentionally in morals and values and how you interact with others, because I didn't have that myself. So I knew how important that was.
I
you know.
love that you said that, because that's something that Brian, I know you're shaking your head there. We've talked about, and not only on the podcast, but Brian, myself, and Randy have talked about. That's such it. The lack of values in society right now is a huge reason, in our opinions, why you see the things happening that you see. And I love that you were so intentional about taking that from your childhood and knowing like, hey, I think this was an opportunity that was in my childhood, and applying it and, trying to improve that for your kids. So that's awesome. Yeah. And we will definitely,
Absolutely.
I definitely want to hear more about that whole homeschooling process, but
Yeah.
we'll come back to
Oh,
that once you
sure,
get through your
sure.
background, for
And
sure.
the thing is, when you're growing up, obviously you're in the midst of it. You don't see it. I didn't really realize how deficient my childhood was until I was in my early 30s, late 40s. And then you look back, and maybe people do it sooner now, but and because you have a lot more awareness of psychology out there than what you did. Now, mind you, I'm going back to the 80s, early 90s. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, so that time frame, that era, it was still of nobody talked about cancer. Like if somebody got cancer, you didn't talk about it. That was like
Yeah.
the evil disease. My grandmother actually had cancer. She told no one in the family. And this was back in 2000, 2006,
Mhm.
2007. And back then, you didn't talk about this stuff. So there's a lot more awareness today, but I knew enough to know that, now that I look back at it, I'm cleaning up a lot of mess of things that I thought was right in my eyes, and they really weren't, so, back to, let's rewind back a little bit. My parents divorced. So we did mention, I think I mentioned that, maybe not. Well, we're talking about divorce. My parents were divorced when I was 13, 14. And that's actually when I met my first husband. So my parents were got divorced. My mother left. And a couple months later, I met my ex-husband. I was a sophomore in high school and he was a senior. And to add more strangeness to my story, he was the only person I ever dated. And at that time, I had such a low self-esteem of myself. I had convinced myself that this is the only person who would ever be interested in me. So therefore, I have to marry him, because nobody up until that point even paid attention to me. So I was so happy that somebody paid attention to me. And I figured, well, okay, I guess this is it. This is what life is going to be like. So we dated all through high school and all through college. I got married 6 years later. I was 20. And I have to say, probably knew within 1 to 2 years of getting married that that was not a very good decision. So
Do you
within 1
think
to 2
so?
years. Yeah.
You mentioned in there, or previously, kind of not having those values when you were growing up, just because you weren't shown that stuff. Do you think that had like played a role in you going into that first relationship and just kind of
Well,
seeking it out, maybe with the wrong intentions? Does that make sense?
I mean, I could see where you draw that conclusion, but I think in all honesty, I had such low self-worth
Mhm.
of myself that I was completely convinced I was like I didn't exist. Right. I
Mm.
just went through, I wasn't noticed. And if I was picked on. So, it was that coupled with the fact that my parents were in the midst of a very nasty divorce. You have to throw my grandparents in there. They were very controlling, right? So they hated my mother because she was the one who left. And so you put that in the mix. Then I meet this guy who's interested in me, and he was pretty nice, and everybody liked him. And they're like, "Oh, that's great. Everybody likes him, so go marry him."
Mhm.
So basically, I did what everybody else wanted me to do, but nobody ever asked me, what does Sue want? And when I tried to do what Sue wanted, like I tried to break up several times, and he would send me cards and flowers and candy. And I just didn't have that strength to walk away. And
Yeah.
so, there was probably all of that came into play. And the fact that everybody liked him, and my mother just got divorced. And unfortunately, I had it in my brain that us dating, if we separated, it would be like divorce, and I would be just as bad as my mom. And I didn't want to be just as bad as my mom. So there was a lot of unnecessary mental baggage that was placed on me. around that
That's
time. And you came from that time frame where, you got married at 2021. That was not unusual.
right.
So you didn't wait, so you throw all that in there. Remember, this is back in 92, late, early 90s, where that was still the norm, rather
Yeah.
than what it looks like today.
Yeah, it
So
reminded me
yeah.
of that Ed Milet podcast episode where he was talking about invisible, motivational,
Hmm.
inspirational,
Yeah.
aspirational, and that invisible kind of
Hmm.
mindset back then became. I
Yeah.
totally
Yeah, I lived
understand that,
most of
and I
my
can
life
empathize that.
invisible. Yeah, I
Right,
lived most of my
right.
life invisible. It's a
Yeah.
hard, and then it turns into victim. So by the time I hit divorce, when I got divorced, I was victim.
Hmm.
So now I'm in the next phase, which is motivational, aspirational, which
Right.
is, after getting divorced. I'll get into that later too, but it's a different time frame. So, within 1 to 2 years of getting married, I'm like, well, you know what, this is what life is going to be like. And I guess I better suck it up now because I'm married. And of course I can't, get divorced. And my ex-husband really isn't a bad guy per se. He's just
Hmm.
not, he just wasn't the right guy for me,
Right.
So,
Gotcha.
and once you start doing that, and I have a very strong type A personality, I'm very go-getting and whatever. And we just start butting heads, and we had just different ideas of what life, was supposed to look like. I never really got a chance to be who I wanted to be. So, that was kind of hard. In 94, I got pregnant kind of unexpectedly with our first child. And, after I got pregnant, that was, I had maybe contemplated divorce for about 30 seconds. Well, once I got pregnant, then divorce was no longer an option. And by the time I was 30, I had 2 more kids, so divorce really, wasn't an option. And I have to mention, part of my story in here is my faith as well. So I grew up Catholic, but at 27, I did get saved and I became part of a non-denominational evangelical Christian church. So divorce really was not an option. So you just, to me at that point, I felt trapped. Right. I had no option. So I might as well make the best of it. And I threw my stuff, I just threw myself into stuff. So I was homeschooling my kids. What happened out of that too is I developed an eating disorder, just to cope with everything that was going on. So that was a 10-year battle, between, it was what I would call what they would deem EDNOS. It's an eating disorder unspecified. So I wasn't a full blown bulimic. I wasn't a full blown anorexic, but I fell in that zone in between. I ran a lot. I weighed not a lot, so my purge was running. That's what I did.
Jeez.
I used to run. And so,
Yeah.
that was, and the other problem too, with being part of the church at that time. And I'm going back to 2011, 12, 13, 14, that time frame of life. I was in my mid 30s, early 40s, and secular counseling in the church space we were in was a no-no. And I think I have to pause here, because if in my own experience, if your church is telling you, oh, secular counseling is evil, you can't go that route, I think that's what did us in, because we went to counseling to a pastor who wasn't qualified to help us with the problems that we had. And so they even got worse. So I have to wonder, looking back, if secular counseling might have helped, because you would have been with somebody qualified to help us. And it didn't help. It takes 2 people to be married. And I fully admit my part. I was a judgmental woman. I was critical. I was angry all the time because of my circumstance. But my ex-husband thought it was 100% my fault. I'm the one who has to get fixed, and he didn't have to get fixed. So that was kind of hard. So I spent almost a decade trying to fix both of us, and it doesn't really work. I mean, I can say that it does not work to try and fix somebody else. So it just kind of kept going downhill from there. And, during that time frame as well, not only did I have an eating disorder, not only was my marriage going downhill, I struggled with suicidal ideation for years, long, long time. And the only thing that really kept me going was my kids. At the end of the day, I got up and I'm like, well, I'm not going to do anything it's really bad in my own eyes, right? In my own eyes. But my kids still need me. So that's,
Sue, I can
I
relate to
needed to
you on
do
a
that.
level. I can relate to you on a level that is just, it's like you're speaking directly to me right now. And for you to, be able to overcome that, not just because of the kids, I'm sure something deep down inside was like, you know what, I've got some more worth to myself. It's not just the kids, but I've got more to live for than that. So, for you to deal with that, I know where you're coming from, and that makes you an incredibly strong person, because the demons behind, those thoughts are very, very strong.
Yeah, the demons behind him. And even, to be honest, that part, it's not that some days, I battle with it some days today with the suicidal ideation. Like it just, it doesn't 100% disappear, even though the circumstances changed. But back then I had no framework. I only had what I knew in the Bible. I only knew what I read, what I read there and what my church friends would tell me. And some days that didn't help either. So it really was just the kids. I didn't know anything about, emotional IQ or emotional intelligence or, self-care or, breathing, taking care of yourself. There was none of that stuff out there. I mean, like I said, I'm going back like a decade, 15 years.
It was always very hush hush.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You don't talk about that. So, I mean, I thought
stigma.
I was, I thought there was really something wrong with me. And it got worse after each kid. I mean, I had postpartum depression after each of my children. The first one wasn't so bad. The second one lasted about 2, 3, 4 months. The third one, it went on for a long time. And the scariest part was the one time I'm like, I just want to drive off a cliff. I just want to drive over this bridge with my kids in the car because I can't take it anymore. Like just wanting to, I remember that one point, I can even picture the bridge in my mind, going over the bridge with the kids in the car and just being done with it because it was just that difficult in my eyes. Like I said, in my eyes at that time. And
was there
so it's
was there a
very real.
specific and Sue, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing all that stuff with us.
Hey, if it can help somebody, I mean, if it can help somebody, then that's why God creates our stories, right? That's what we're here for.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to ask you. Was there one thing that you could point to in that period before we get into, I know that we're going to share some information about the divorce, but was there one thing in that period that kind of you look at as a turning point, or was it a combination of things?
Back then, what kept me from actually pulling the trigger and going through the motions? Is that what you're asking? Like,
yeah, or I'm thinking kind of like, when did it start? When did you start making progress away from the lowest point?
The epiphany you had, which was like, I got to change something.
Well, in all honesty, there wasn't one. It was when I got divorced. So, all that time frame in my life, I just coped with it and kept status quo. I would throw myself into something. So if church needed a leadership team for something, I'd throw myself. It was a distractions. I would look for any kind of distraction I could think of. So not only was I running 5 times a week, at least 3 miles a day, not only was I counting every calorie and controlling that, I controlled my kids at homeschool. I did whatever I could to control my environment. So that was how I coped with it. And because of my faith, my background, if you kill yourself, you go to hell. That was enough to scare me that I'm like, well, I don't want to spend eternity in hell. So I guess I better work it out and figure it out on this planet here, while I'm still here. And I just, it was survival. I would say most of that through like 2000, from 2000, when my oldest went into kindergarten, till about 2014 was survival. Basically, just status quo survival, homeschooling, whatever, just trying to work, trying to come up with something, but it was just survival and distraction.
Yeah, and I used to live kind of not in the same exact situation, but that same mindset, because there was so much going on with my emotions in the background and stuff that I didn't share with people. I just kept myself busy. I could not relax. And if I tried to relax, I got caught up in my thoughts, and then I just had to go do something. I would literally
Yeah.
say, well, this can be done. This can be done. I can do laundry. I can do this. I can do this. And I would just go do stuff, and I wouldn't sit down because I didn't
Yeah.
want to be alone with my thoughts.
That
And
was
what I
my
wanted to,
life. Yeah, that
yeah.
was my life. I did the same thing. The kids are like, you can't sit still. You can't do that. Like to watch a movie. Oh my gosh.
Right.
Like I had to be doing 10 other things while I was watching the movie. I mean, I just
Yeah.
couldn't sit and drove my ex-husband crazy.
Yeah.
Absolutely crazy. He's like, why can't you just sit still? I'm like, because I need to be busy. I need to be productive. There's always something to do.
Right. And that's where,
So,
if you're out there and you relate to that, there's might be something going on where you might want to go, because that I would ignore all of the feelings by keeping myself busy. So if you
mhm.
find yourself in that situation, there are plenty of opportunities out there to get help.
Oh
So
yeah.
don't feel that
Yeah.
you have
I
to
mean,
battle that alone.
yeah. I mean, I did call the suicidal hotline. I
Yeah.
mean, I did get that far one day,
Jeez.
a couple of years
Mhm.
ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like I was at that point, I'm like, I can't, I just, and actually that was after I got divorced.
Mm.
So in 2017, I got divorced and I was married for 23 years. And at that point I had known my husband almost 30. So it
So
was kind
you
of like
said
a
that the
marriage for 30
divorce,
years.
right? And you
Yeah.
said that divorce really is what led you to, starting to make progress. So obviously
Well,
it took a
yeah,
turn
yeah,
after that, but kind of
yeah,
walk
it
us through
did.
that.
Yeah,
Do you mind walking us through that?
so getting divorced, I mean, I am remarried and my husband's wonderful. He just, I can now be me where before I could not be me. And that's what I needed. I needed to just be me. And if you ask my three kids, they will say that one of the best things we did was for us to get divorced. I mean, like
Mhm.
they actually signed off on the divorce. They said, you're so much happier. Both my ex-husband and I are much better people not being around each other. And that's a positive, but there's also negatives that come out of divorce as well. So I got divorced because I was at the end of my rope. I mean,
Mhm.
to me at that time, that was the only option I could see. And that was the door that I had to walk through. And so good, bad, or indifferent, I'm not proud of it. I mean, I think we probably could have saved it. I mean, it took me years later to realize my ex-husband came from an abusive alcoholic home. And although we had no alcohol in our home, he was not abusive. Our marriage had traits of what happens in an abusive alcoholic home. And we didn't recognize it at all. We didn't get help for it. And I think way back when, had we realized that a lot of our problems stemmed from that and had gotten marital counseling from that angle, I think, it's very possible the outcome would have been different. I don't know, but I know that we probably should have gotten some help. So, that stuff follows you around. If you think it's not going to follow you around, it follows you around. And it did
Mhm.
definitely for us.
I mean, hindsight's 2020, and
Oh, it's always 2020, right?
you can
Yeah.
talk about that all day long. But
Yeah,
if
right. But if it
today,
helps, hey, but if it helps somebody else out, who's in
for
that, it's
sure,
like, like learn from my hindsight, learn from my mistakes, walk away from them so you don't repeat the same. So if there's somebody out there listening that says, wow, my marriage isn't going so great, but I'm seeing some of these markers. If it helps them, if you help one person, then the pain in your story is worth it. To
for
look
sure.
back, not ruminate there, but allow someone else to learn from what you walked through, for what it's
Yeah,
Absolutely.
worth. Yeah.
I think something that you shared a little while ago before you kind of got into those details was about taking ownership. You had pointed out like, hey, there was plenty that I could have done in this situation to
Sure.
take action, and that was a huge thing for myself. Everything was somebody else's fault. At that point in my life when I was going through that divorce, nothing was Kyle's fault. It was society's fault, it was my wife's fault, it was my parents' fault for certain, it was just such an incredibly uh, disempowering, I don't know the right word, but
Mm,
I had no power in my own life because I gave that power to everybody else by blaming them. And
mhm.
like you said, it's a relationship. There are always two parts to every relationship, no matter
Yeah.
what. So I think there's a lot of power in what you said there, but in order to change your life, you have to take ownership. If you
Oh,
just blame
absolutely.
everybody else, there's no power in
Absolutely.
that
Yeah,
whatsoever.
absolutely.
So,
And the thing with divorce, I mean, my parents divorced, like I said, when I was 13. So my mom was pretty much about the same age-ish. I think she was almost 40 when, or my parents were like in their 40s when they got divorced. And when that happened, when I was 14, I was very angry at my mother. I blamed her. I'm like, why did you do this to me? Blah, blah, blah. And, it wasn't until 25 years later where I realized, oh, now I see. Now I see what my mom went through and why she did what she had to do, because that saved her sanity. And, I share that to say when two people get divorced, no one else is privy to what goes on behind closed doors. So you really can't gauge what's happening. Like, no, like from the outside, you can say, oh, it's a terrible thing. Don't do this, blah, blah, blah. Everybody can come in and talk. But at the end of the day, nobody knew what was going on inside my mind and behind closed doors, so it's hard, it's hard. And I'm talking about just regular divorce, like just irreconcilable differences. We're not touching on the abusive, relationships, the abusive marriages, the ones that really are, where the kids are in danger or somebody's in danger, that's a whole different ballpark than where we're at. So I just want to make that very clear that, I'm not saying to anybody you should stay married, but if you can, and it's within your power, if you're looking at irreconcilable differences, I would say that figure out what those are. And if you really can't reconcile them after having a third party come in and take a look, then go from there. But
I would say
yeah,
that that's, I would say that that's a very, very good point. There are plenty of marriages where people just walk away from each other and there really is no effort made. So if there's an opportunity to make that effort, not just for the children, but for your own sanity, for your spouse's sanity, I think that that's probably the most emotional, intelligent way to go about it.
sure.
But sometimes it just doesn't exist. But like you said,
Well,
if
yeah,
it's
and sometimes
a
you don't
safety
see it.
factor,
Yeah,
that's
it's a
different.
safety factor. You're in a whole different ball game right there. And
For sure.
in my defense and my ex-husband's defense as well, at the time when I asked him for a divorce, number one, he didn't see it coming, or he kind of saw it coming. The kids kind of saw it coming. And number two, neither of us at that time acknowledged that we need to put in the hard work. I had already given up in my mind, and I guess he gave up in his mind. So when you get to that point that you're giving up, that you just don't see any hope, then years later you look at it and it's like, oh, well, maybe we really could have done something. So maybe out of our stories, just to get somebody to pause, if you think that's, if you think divorce, here's what I learned. If you think divorce is going to solve your problem, again, irreconcilable differences. If you think divorce is going to solve your problem, divorce will not solve your problem. Your problem will follow you, because you have to start working on you. So
Sure.
Divorce is not going to solve the problem. I thought getting divorced would solve my problem. It solved a few, but it didn't solve many. And I still struggled. Like I said, I called the suicidal hotline after I got divorced. It was like 2 years, I think, after I'd been divorced already. So, it did not solve the problem. So I think that's,
And I think that goes to say that goes for both parties, maybe not just the
Yeah, right.
initiator, but maybe
Sure.
the person that doesn't see it coming. There is always room for improvement. And whether it is, the person who just says, yeah, I can't do this anymore, I want out.
Yeah.
The other person that's involved, there's plenty of opportunity for them to support, help,
Sure.
and, further
Takes
the
two
process.
people to be married, it takes two
Absolutely.
people and then, but sometimes, I don't know. I mean, I wouldn't blanket say across the board, you should do everything in your power to stay married, blah, blah, blah. If there's no kids involved, that's one path. If you don't have those kids and you part ways. I know someone who got married, his wife cheated on him. There was no kids at all. And he is now got divorced, now happily, ecstatically married the second time around,
Sure.
and that's one thing. When you start putting those kids in the mix, that's where it gets hairy, and everybody suffers in some capacity. And, I'll throw a small plug for my podcast coming out next week. That would be, I don't know what the date is, June something. Anyway, a friend of mine and myself, we talk about divorce, and the title is called Divorce is a Multi-Car Accident. And we unpack that. So I won't do that here. You'll have to listen.
Yeah. Keep us on the edge of our seats. I love
Yeah,
it.
that's right. You have to go listen.
Well, I'm excited to hear that, Sue, because I would like that opportunity to learn from any information that you and your friend have to give. So I will
Yeah,
be
he is
tuning into
divorced
that
as
for
well.
sure.
He was pretty much in the same spot I was as far as number of years married and children, getting married very young. So his story and my story are very similar, and we're now on the other end of it as well. So it was an interesting conversation. And we went on for a while with hopefully we can help somebody, and there's some nugget of information in there that somebody can walk away with.
Yeah, one thing that
So-
you said in there, Sue, that I wanted to point out because I think it was really important, was you talked about how important it is to be taking care of yourself, especially when you're in a relationship. That was something that I ignored for so long. And again, going back to that victim mentality, I didn't take care of myself. I didn't address things that had happened in my past. I wasn't on this path of self-improvement and self-growth. I wasn't the most disciplined version of myself. So you have to be loyal to, in order to show up for other people the best way you can. You also have to put yourself first sometimes, because you have to be the best version of yourself. How can you show up for other people when you're empty inside and you're dealing with all of this stuff? That stuff needs to be addressed to be the best spouse, to be the best parent, to be the best employee or entrepreneur or leader, or whatever you may be, or whatever you identify as there. Take care of yourself. It is critical to the success that you have in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to tweak that a little bit, and I'll tell you from my experience, I agree with you. Absolutely. 100%. And I think within the last 5, 6, 7 years, you've seen an explosion of self-help, self-care. Take care of yourself, take care of yourself. So I'm going to go back 10, 15, 20 years now. That was not like, if you had to go to somebody to talk to them about self-help care, there was something wrong with you. I mean, that was the stigma that was there. Now, put that on the side in a box, and then pull out the other box. Like I said in the beginning, at age 27, I got saved into a non-denominational evangelical Christian church, right? So we read the Bible, we know our Bible, and in it, it says, do not be selfish, that you are to die to yourself and serve others. And the church that I was part of, they may not be that way today, but back when I was part of them, they were very legalistic. And that means they just took everything literally. So if you were seen as doing something for yourself, like going on a personal retreat or going to a spa to take care of yourself, or getting away from the kids for a couple of days while your husband, that was seen as being very selfish. You're not supposed to do that. Don't take care of yourself. That's that self-help stuff. Yet that's wrong. You're not supposed to do that. So, I just was in this this period in time of my life where it's like, okay, I have to die to myself. Christ died for us, so I have to die to myself. And that means I have to go continually, nonstop, and take care of everybody else but me. And it's taken me a long time and a lot of work. And it's probably more recently than not, just to finally give myself permission to take care of myself. And I had a mentor tell me that. He's like, you now need to do what's best for Sue, not anybody else. You need to take care of Sue.
As a born Catholic, going to Catholic school, growing up and going to church, you learn all those same things. Later on in life, I was privy to some friends that were in a non-denominational Christian youth group. And I started learning about a lot of that, at 18. And early in my marriage, I would tell my spouse, you need to spend some time with your friends. You need some time away. You need some time to, do things for yourself. And that was very hard for her. So for you to say that kind of, in my mind, says a lot about, if you're given that opportunity by your spouse, you should take it. It's not for, just an escape. It is a very healthy aspect of life and marriage. So to hear you say that is pretty cool, because, I would agree with you in saying that that's a very, very important part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my go ahead.
What I was going to say, so we just because we always talk so negative about things that are going on in society. And by we, I mean Brian, Randy, and myself, and sometimes on the podcast, it's easy to point out everything that you don't agree with, the world and society. One thing that you said there that I think is a huge positive of what we have going on in society is that focus on self-care and self-development and self-improvement. That is, like you said, you go back to even when Brian and I were in high school in the early 2000s. I don't remember, and I don't remember that. And when I did hear about life coaches, stuff like that, I made fun of it. I thought if
They're
you
all
had to
laughing.
do that,
Yeah. I didn't.
I looked at it as a weakness, and it's not.
I
It's
didn't
a
hear of a
strength.
life coach, and I didn't hear of a life coach until I joined Emerge in October 2022. I had no idea that they even existed. Like, why would you even get one? Now I see the value behind it as well. And I don't want to completely knock. I mean, I'm still a Christian. I walked away from my faith when I got divorced. But we go to church now. I've gone back. I've had experiences in the 15 years, 17 years. I was with the same church for almost 17 years, and I had phenomenal experiences. This is a conversation for another day, but I've had experiences where I can't deny the existence of God. I know God has been faithful to me. I have not been faithful, and it is what it is. I had free will. I did what I did, and it is what it is. But, I don't blame God. I don't go up there going like, God, why did you, because I may never know this side of the dirt, right? So, and I'm okay with that. All things happen for a reason. It says in Romans 8, all things happen for the good of those who love him in Christ Jesus. So all things happen, good, bad, or indifferent, just says all things. It doesn't say only good things happen to people who are in Christ. And then the other is, take heart. There's another verse that says, take heart, in this life you will have trial and tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world. That was Jesus's word. So it's like, okay, life is going to be hard, and we should expect it.
Yeah.
So
Powerful words there for sure.
Absolutely. We've talked quite a bit about, your childhood growing up and leading into marriage and the divorce thing. That's very, very tough. At some point or another in these last years, you said in 2022 is when you really learned, after all this stuff, what was it that took you to where you are today? Progressing from the divorce and raising children as a single parent, and learn to love yourself and dedicating all that. What part of the ideal skills brought you back to progression? What led you on the path of where you're at today?
What led me on the path? Well, I would say after I got divorced, I knew there had to be more to life than this, right? So I started searching. I am professionally, by trade, I have a secondary education math certificate. I taught in the schools in the early 90s. Then I homeschooled my kids for almost a 15-year time span. In 2015, I went back to work. And I think that's kind of where it all started. It started me on this quest to figure out, who do I really want to be? So I tried for, I would say, 5 years, 2015 through 2021, to get a permanent teaching position. Just, it never materialized. And I think from that it was kind of a failure. And then out of that, fast forward just a couple of years, I now work as a financial advisor for a friend of mine. I have my Series 7 and my 66 licenses, and that's what I do now. But even in that time, like, I still was looking, I'm like, okay, so teaching wasn't it. Now I'm a financial advisor. It's going, it's not there's great things that are in my job, and then there are things that are challenging about my job. And I think what really absolutely changed it was I joined Emerge in October 2020. And right to that point, like right before that point, probably for about a year and a half, and God sent a mentor to me that I didn't realize. And so it would be January 2020. January 2020, I met this person, and I didn't know who he was. Turns out he was a multi high net worth multimillionaire. and I asked him the question. I saw him reading the Wall Street Journal Saturday morning at the coffee shop, and we had just had a casual, conversations in passing. And I said to him, "Do you understand that stock stuff?" I'm like, "Do you
I
know how
love
to
that.
buy a stock?" I'm like, I find that stuff fascinating, and I'm studying. I went into my little spiel. I'm studying for my Series 7. I'm still a math teacher, but blah, blah, blah. I'm like, "Do you understand that stock stuff?" He's like, "Yeah, I do a little bit." Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. The story went on to, like, he was actually a real estate investor. He's an attorney. He's a pilot. He has this impressive stock portfolio. And he taught me how to place my first trade. And he also dropped that burning desire within me that I can be more than who I am right now. And he was the only one that I can say who actually believed in me that I could do really cool crap. He's like, he was the one who encouraged me to sell my home. He's like, "I know you can do it." And I was like, "Wow, I really can. Like, I can do something like." He's like, "Yeah, sure. You can do whatever you want." And that was very foreign to me. I grew up most of my life, childhood, teens, marriage. I don't remember anybody encouraging me like that to say, "You know what, you can go do whatever you want to do." That was foreign to me. And that started the personal development journey and the financial independent journey. And it was slow. It's still it accelerated when I joined Emerge in October. And then once I hit Emerge, it was like somebody took the blinders off my eyes, and I went, like, this whole world's out here. I went, "Oh my gosh. Okay, I can go do these things." It was so the self-development and putting the hard reps in on myself. It started probably January last year, but I was doing it on my own because I didn't have Emerge. When I joined Emerge and realized, oh gosh, there are all these people out here who are in self-development, who want to be better versions of themselves, and I can actually talk to them and they understand my struggle. That's when my life started really changing, to the point where, I feel like I'm in a much better place now than I was even this time last year, even with making decisions or, making decisions the big one is making decisions, what to do with my money, where to go forth from here. So yeah, I don't know if I completely answered your question or not, but
No, I mean, I think
Yeah.
you have. I think you've elaborated on where you went after all those trials and tribulations. But to go back to it, what was, if you could name it, one of the ideal skills? Was it the discipline? Was it loyalty? Was it the emotional intelligence? What piece was it that really started saying, okay, this is what I need to do. I need to follow this dream, sell my home, become a financial advisor, and start teaching other people how to live their life the way I'm starting to do it now?
I would have to say it was discipline. Because if I wasn't disciplined, because when I passed those exams, the Series 7, not so much the 66, but I had to pass first the securities industry exam, the SIE, securities industry. Yeah, the SIE. I had to pass that first, and then I had to study for the Series 7 and pass that one. I was working full time teaching and studying at night to pass those exams. And it was in an industry I had no real, not a lot of, I really didn't have a clue on, right? So, because I was a math teacher and here I'm studying at night for the financial industry. So yeah, I had to be disciplined, every night, 6 to 7:30 or 6 to 8 p.m. every night for almost a year. It took me a year. It took me 6 months for the first one, and it took me 6 months to pass the second one. So yeah, discipline. I had to be disciplined. I didn't have a choice, but also there was emotional intelligence in there because I was forcing myself. I'm like, Sue, you can't be who you were to turn into who you want to be. So you have to work on that as well. So I think both of them kind of went hand in hand. I had to be disciplined, but I'm also driven too. So the drive and the discipline kind of, play off of one another. And I have that type A personality. And, it's just that to me, there was no other option.
Sure.
I couldn't go and stay in teaching because my job was done at the end of the year. I had nothing else on board afterwards. I'm okay. I might as well be a financial advisor. There was no other at that time. I could see no other option.
Yeah,
Sure.
I hear a lot of intentionality in there too. So you became intentional with your circle by joining a mastermind, by
Oh,
joining
sure.
Go Abundance Emerge, and surrounding yourself with people who are doing big things. So you could see the possibility and you have that support system. So that stood out to me as well. And like we talk about all the time, all of these skills, the 5 ideal skills, intentionality, discipline, emotional intelligence, accountability, and loyalty, they all tie together. And I
Yes.
think the one that you said with discipline, that's the foundation. It's right there. If you can become disciplined, if you can train your mind to become the most disciplined version of yourself, then there is no limit. The possibilities are endless what you can accomplish in your life. So that's incredible. So I know also you have your podcast. So Small Steps, Big Wins. Randy and myself had the honor to be on it, which was
Mhm.
absolutely incredible. So share with us what does Small Steps, Big Wins mean, and what's your intent there with the podcast?
Sure. So back in January, I started the podcast, like you said, Small Steps, Big Wins. And the purpose of my podcast is basically to empower people to change their lives by believing in their capacity to grow through positive encouragement and experiences. And so I have guests on and they tell their stories of big wins and the small steps that they took to get there. And, my hope is whoever's listening is going to be encouraged and inspired as well. So, and it was born out of being part of a merge, and we have a private Facebook page. And I'm reading all these stories of people doing some amazing things. And to me, those stories seemed self contained in that Facebook page. And I felt that, well, wait a minute, what if we could get these stories for people who would not otherwise be on a podcast, get their stories out there because their life is in the process of unfolding and you can see it happening in real time. So I'm like, hey, why not? Let's make this podcast. And on the back end for me, it was a challenge. Because I just wanted to challenge myself to do something. I watched all these people doing all these really cool stuff. I love real estate. I'm not in that space yet for a number of reasons. And I'm like, well, now I have to do something. All right, let's start a podcast. And then with it, I'm like, well, you can't have a podcast without a website. So I reached out to a friend of mine and said, can you host my website for me? He builds websites that's his job. He's like, yeah, sure. And I said, well, can you get me started? I think I can build my own website. He's like, well, okay. Yeah, here's WordPress. Go have fun. And so, yeah, I built my website. So, which is really cool because I can go ahead and manage it as well.
That's
So
awesome.
Awesome.
launched a
And
podcast and everything about it. Yep.
yeah, and we use that small steps. So when we talk about discipline and becoming the most disciplined version of yourself, if you're someone who is doesn't identify as a very disciplined person, we'll say. And I use that identify very intentionally because if you want to become disciplined, you need to start adopting that as your identity. But if you're somebody who's not there yet, and you see guys like David Goggins and like Jocko Willink and Cameron Haynes and Ed Milet, who's another incredibly disciplined person. I look at Joe Rogan as being incredibly disciplined. Basically, anybody who's at the top of their game, they are disciplined. You're not going to go from where you are to being that person that you aspire to be overnight. It starts by
Right.
taking one small step and doing it consistently over and over again, day after day after day, and building upon that foundation that you lay with yourself. It just starts with one small little thing. And Randy's talked about it plenty before. If you're somebody who doesn't drink enough water and you need to be drinking a gallon a day, well, you're not just going to start from no water and only drinking coffee and pop and Gatorade to drinking a gallon of water the next day. Start by having a couple bottles. And then
Mhm.
after 30 days, it's become habit, add a few more. And this is what our coaching foundation is based on. It's really starting those small steps and holding you accountable and showing that you have all of this within you. Everybody
Mhm.
has it within, but you have to believe that it's within you, and you believe by starting out and doing it and being successful. Then you believe that you can do it, and then the next thing is doesn't seem so daunting because you've
Mhm.
already done one thing. So I love the name of your podcast. It's hands down my favorite podcast name, because it's just not even hearing. You don't even, I mean, please, you absolutely listen to an episode, because there's amazing, but you know exactly what it's about just by reading the title. I mean, and it's so actionable. You're giving actionable advice in the title of your podcast. In order to achieve big wins, just start taking small steps and you'll eventually get there. I love it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just ready to say, like, just to pull out, like, I think you're right. Small steps for people just to, and even myself, or anybody who wants to change. There's a good book out there, Atomic Habits, which does help with that process. But I also, as you were talking, you mentioned, like people who are trying to change, and you change one small thing at a time. There are those out there. And I've done this myself, where I wake up one morning and I'm like, I'm not going to drink coffee this week. Boom, that's it. There's no small step. There's no coming down off it. Or even with the water thing, same thing. Like there's nothing wrong with being that type of person where you wake up and you're just like, no, I refuse. I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to change. And sometimes they're big things, like smoking or drinking or things like that. You've heard those stories out there where people have gone completely cold turkey. So I agree. I think probably 80% of the population, 80 to 90, fall under that category where you need those small steps. But I just want to acknowledge, because I can be like that. I have that type A personality where I get sick of something. I get up and I'm like, damn it, I'm not going to do that today. I'm not going to do that ever again. There's problems with that too. Sometimes, I'm done. I'm done being that. Yeah, that never word. That's something that I think shouldn't be part of the English language.
Yeah, I agree with that, because I look at that. So there's a lot of people that do this keto diet, was this huge hot thing where you don't eat any carbohydrates, right?
Yeah,
and
I did that.
I'm like,
do that.
But how are you never going to eat carbs again for your entire
you
life?
can't.
You can't do that.
You can't sustain it. Yeah, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable. And then the problem with putting that never in there, like, or you can go the other extreme where I am always going to wake up at 5 a.m. in the morning, no matter what. I'm getting up at 5 a.m. in the morning, and that one day you were up in the middle of the night 10 times with the kids, or if it's in my case, I'm up 3 times a night with the cat. See, cats are just toddlers that never grow up. They never grow up. And I have 2 of them, and the one sleeps through the night. The one is a toddler. She's just consistent, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m., so, like, and then sometimes those mornings I gave up on it, to be honest with you, like I have to get up at 5 o'clock every morning. It's like, what, because what happens when you set up that ultimatum in your mind and then you don't make it, that feeling of failure, I think, is worse than what you're trying to accomplish in that ultimatum.
That's why people fall off the wagon when you do it and you don't have balance to it. You can fall off the wagon, and that's where, for me, I look at myself, and there's more levels. I'm still growing, but I look at myself as somebody who's pretty friggin' disciplined, especially compared to your everyday human being. However, I get up at 4:30 in the morning, Monday through Saturday. Sundays, and typically I'll still get up very early on Sundays, but I allow myself the flexibility to not do it on Sundays if I need the rest or if I just don't want to. Same thing with a lot of my daily habits. On Sundays, I don't have to stretch. I don't have to read. I don't have to do certain things that I do have to, in my mind, in my opinion, I have to do Monday through Saturday. And here's the beauty of it. I still typically do them all on Sundays, but I have allowed myself the flexibility to not do it if I so choose. Same thing with my diet. Now, that's one thing on Sundays that I do not, I definitely take advantage of. So tonight we're going to Sonic, and then I bought a pint of ice cream for afterwards and a whole thing of golden Oreos.
You sound like my husband. That's
he's gonna be like the kid on heavyweights where they're out in the middle of the field throwing marshmallows down.
Yeah. Oh,
yeah, we've done that too. You can get away with that. If you've been eating 1,500 calories during the week, it's like that 3,000 calorie binge is awesome. And you don't gain, but you have to. My husband does that. He gets up the next morning. He goes, I didn't gain a whole pound this weekend. I'm like, shut up. Like, it's like.
Well,
I look at what you eat and gain weight. Like, so
But that's the importance of balance, because on Sundays
sure.
I do that. So then on Monday through Saturday, I can be very disciplined, because I'm not
Right.
just telling, and that's why so many people fall off healthy habits from a nutritional standpoint, because they restrict it so greatly that
Right.
it becomes this horrible mental battle. No, allow yourself some flexibility. Nutrition is all about balance. Just
Right.
eat a balanced diet. That's really, and don't overdo it. Don't
Well, I
over
think people can
consume.
put unrealistic expectations on themselves. And there's a
Absolutely.
lot of unrealistic diets out there. And, this is coming from me. I've tried a ton of them too. We've done keto. I've been gluten free off and on for a long time. My kids had food allergies. I've gone down that path. I was probably gluten free for probably a decade. I was a vegetarian at one point. So I've run the gamut, as far as diets go, and good, bad, or indifferent. It's very hard to stay to one thing. And some people do it. Like they're like, I'll never eat sugar again. And I know somebody who hasn't had meat in 20 years, won't touch it. I think it's just there's some things, and I think if all of us dig really deep, there are one or two things in our lives where we know we won't cross that line, and we're
Hmm.
extremely disciplined in that section, in that area right there.
Yes.
And then there's other things where you're just like, I'm just not going to be disciplined here. So I think we all have it within us. And, I kind of tell myself, if there's something I can do, I probably can do more. Like just
Yes.
challenging
Yes.
myself to go the next rep, to go the extra mile, to run 5 more minutes, to just do. And that's, I heard Ed Milet, you mentioned him. I love Ed
Hmm.
Milet. He
Hmm.
he was talking about that. Like, just do one more. You are one more away. You are one away from that next promotion. You are one away from that next positive phone call. You are one away from fill in the blank, and not to give up.
Yeah, and you're
You're
so
just one away.
you're capable of so much more than you think. So
Mhm.
yesterday, Brian and I talked about this a little bit before we got started recording. Yesterday, my wife and I went out and we were going to do 10 hill sprints. And this hill, it's not the steepest hill in the world, but it is pretty long. So we did 10, and we're walking back from the hill. It's about a mile walk out there, a mile walk back. And my wife goes, I think I'm going to do some abs when I get home, which is something I wasn't planning on doing. So I'm like, okay, let's do 6 sets, 15 sit-ups, straight into 15 leg raises. I will go while you break, and then vice versa, and we just cycle through. Well, on her last set, she was, getting pretty burned out by the last set. I'm like, 20. You got 20 in you. I know you do. She knocked out that 20, and she emptied the tank on that 20. She was spent after that. So I get down and I'm like, okay, how many am I doing? Because I know if I set the limit, I'm not going to push myself to exhaustion, most likely. So she jokingly says 45.
I
So
was hoping she told you 100.
yeah, well, 45, tripling what we were originally doing. I'm like, okay, let's get after it. 45. I
Yeah.
knocked them out. No pause, no break, 45. But I wouldn't have reached that limit, that potential, had she not challenged me. So again,
Mhm.
you're capable of doing so much more, and you will never know what that is unless you continuously find your 100%. And then
Mhm.
once you've reached it, well, guess what? That's no longer your 100%. There's another level to it. And there are very few people in the world that have ever found that 100% limit. I was reading Cameron Haynes' book, Endure, and he was running, and I cannot remember her name. She ran, it was 309 miles straight or something absolutely insane. I'm like,
You're talking
that's
about Forrest Gump.
the female version, apparently.
309 miles, man. That's incredible. I
Holy
need to find
moly.
Insane.
out who this woman is and
Read the
figure
book. You got
out.
to read
Yeah.
Cameron Haynes' book. It was so cool,
Wow.
by the way. When I got every time I wrap up a book, especially if it's somebody that I follow on social media already, I will make a post and I'll tag them in it. And he shared the post, which was super cool. So that
Wow.
was awesome. And then Nick
Congrats.
Lavery, yeah. So Nick Lavery, who's another personal, idol of mine, he did the same thing a while back. So it's cool. And I still owe him a t-shirt. I said I was going to mail him a t-shirt and I haven't yet. So I need to do that. And he's a big, scary human.
I was going to say, we need to find the right amount of fabric to equip him, but
yeah, I got his size. It's
I like
2XL.
your logo, by the way. I have to give a plug for your logo. I really do. That's the
shout out to
absolute
Lena.
coolest logo ever.
Yeah, Lena designed that for us. So shout out to
really?
Lena. Yeah.
Wow,
so
cool.
One thing, so we teased about the homeschool story. So I think what we'll do is, if you're open to it, I would love to do a second podcast episode with just talking about homeschooling and education.
Oh,
and
yeah, that's an hour
we'll
and a
have
half
a fun
right there.
time. Yeah, exactly. I think we'll have a fun time with that. So let's do that. We'll split it into 2 episodes. So let's wrap up with our 3 staple questions. So we'll start off with the first one, which is, and Brian, don't forget your question this time. Yeah, he's already thinking. He's thinking about it. So the first question,
I'm ready. Hit me.
Yep. So it's of the ideal skills. And again, just for a refresher for everybody out there, intentionality, discipline, emotional intelligence, accountability, and loyalty. Which is your biggest challenge, and what are some things that you do in order to work on that area?
Well, hands down, and I think we touched on it, is discipline. Now, it took me about a half a second to figure out which one it was, because to me, like me personally, if I don't live a disciplined life, that, it's very difficult to practice and embrace the other skills, because I think discipline just permeates the rest of them. If you don't have discipline, it's hard to live with intentionality. If you don't have discipline, it's hard to work on your emotional intelligence and improve who you are as a person. If you're not disciplined to be accountable, you're not going to show up for accountability, and even loyalty. It's if you're not disciplined, it's hard to be loyal to that which you're going to be loyal to. So I think hands down, discipline for me is the skill that I would bring into every aspect of life. Discipline in my podcast. If I don't get my podcasts out there, they don't get out there, right? My path at this point is just to focus on the habits that I have, and then start incorporating the ones into my life that I need to be, to be accountable for. And just, there's just a couple things I'm working on. I don't know if that answers what I'm doing to focus on the skill, but I think it's just the practical. If you want the practical, I have a planner, like one of those big planners that I lay out, and so every Sunday evening I plan out my day, my week, my days in my week. And that's intentionality is in that, but I also have to be disciplined to sit down and write it out to begin with. So
yeah, absolutely.
So that's my practical.
Is there anybody helping you work on your discipline skill?
Well, you.
Selfless
you
plug.
are, Kyle. That habit tracker, I get that little notification on my phone. I didn't turn them off. And I think, you know what? I'm glad it's there. So I set those, I set, I set reachable goals for myself. And now, honestly, you want me to be 100% real? I think I should have put one of them on there that I don't think I can do, to force myself to do it. So, but I was trying to think about what that is. So I haven't figured it out yet. So once I figure out what that is, I'll let you know. But I was looking at my list and I'm like, these are things that I kind of like already do, but some days I
that's
don't
not even
do
a
them.
challenge. Yeah, you got to push the limits. We got to empty the tank.
I
coach
fessed up.
Your coach Kyle sitting across the computer screen from you is going to be in your butt come next phone call. He's going to really push you now.
I think inadvertently I just got caught.
Ooh, you did. You were caught. But you got caught by maintaining that ownership and holding yourself accountable. So I love it. You're calling yourself out, and that's a huge thing, is to recognize that, saying, hey, I'm not pushing the limits here. I'm doing things that I've done before. So I think that's pretty valuable right there.
I am looking at my list. There are things on here, the reading part. Absolutely. I was not consistent on that. So that's challenging to me, to make sure I get my reading in every day. I mean, there are things on this list that, I'm not saying the whole list was wishy-washy, but those are things that are on there that I want that were not habits in my life, that I want to become habits. Right. But I think I need an impossible one on there. So we can talk later on that. Let's
do it. Yeah, we'll talk about it for sure. All right, Brian, you're up.
So, what was it? No. So out of all the, podcasts that you listened to, books that you've read over the course of your life, what podcast or what book would you say has been the most impactful for you in setting you on the path in which you're on today?
That's one hell of a question because, I can't answer just one. So I was looking at that going like, and it changes for each season, right? And I'm going to break out of the mold and write my own rules. So I'm going to give you actually the podcast and the book. So I'm not even going to follow your rule. I don't know where that falls under the ideal skills. I think I just broke one of them.
I just made a new one. Don't question the coach.
Yeah. No, I love it.
Besides recommending my own podcast, which is Small Steps, Big Wins podcast, I'll put a shameless plug in for that one. The podcast is, I've been absolutely consumed. Oh, and besides your podcast, the Ideal podcast. So those are two, like hands down, absolutely everybody should listen to. The third one in that lineup would be anything from, Ed Milet has his own podcast. I consume anything that Ed Milet puts out. So I just think there's just so much there for everybody. I love it. But there's, honestly, in all honesty, there are so many good podcasts out there that, and they can change over time for people depending on where they are. So right now I'm immersed in Ed Milet. The book changes. That's like a moving target too. So, I won't go into all of them, but number one would be Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That one was the one that changed my trajectory as far as how I viewed my money and finances and how I looked at assets and liabilities. So if anybody needs to get their crap together with their finances and wants to really change their life, that is the one book. Definitely did it for me. My mentor friend a couple years ago, he said to me, you should read that book. Actually, It was that book, The Millionaire Next Door and The Value Investor. Those were the three he told me I had to read. And I did. The book I'm currently reading now that I would highly recommend is Ray Dalio's Principles. And, throughout the entire book, Ray is just an amazing man who lives with intentionality. So talking about your 5 skills, but he also lives with purpose too. His book, he has great depths of understanding of the human condition, and he institutes systems in order to make things run efficiently. So that's how he looks at life. He sees life as a puzzle, and then things that just need to be solved. And he has in there principles for work and for life. And, just to tie that back into my upbringing and how I struggled all those years trying to figure out my own moral values and everything. I wish somebody had handed me that book back then, because in his principles for life and work, it basically sets the framework that, like how to live an intentional life, what reality looks like. I mean, there's just so much in there. It's hard to unpack it in a few sentences, but that would be the other book, hands down.
I look forward to, I'm going to look that up. It sounds like a very interesting book. 2 things before Kyle asks you that final question. I couldn't agree with you more. Rich Dad, Poor Dad was something. There was an episode that was never aired because Brian was terrible, but that was the book that I said that really did a lot for me. That's for the everyday person, people who are really struggling to paycheck to paycheck, even though people who are doing well enough but they want to do better. So that's an awesome book. And then the second thing was, I'm glad you plugged our podcast. You will get paid after the episode today, so thank you.
I'm a size small in the medium I'm a size small in the shirts.
Well, I'm sure we've got one with your name on it, but Kyle, hit her with that third question.
Yeah. So lastly, what's one piece of advice that you would like to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, I really pondered this one over. I think I would leave your listeners with the fact that life is too short to live the way someone else thinks you should. And you have more strength in you than you think to change your mindset. That'll change your destiny. And don't wait until tomorrow to start your life today. Search until you find your authentic self. I mean, if you're not sure, just keep searching. You will find it. Find the one thing that comes naturally for you and see if you can use that thing to make you money so it doesn't feel like a job, And the practical side of all this, the practical application of all this is to get yourself around other people who are doing what you want to do. And that was the one thing that pretty much changed my life. I started surrounding myself with people who I wanted to be. And that's why that's was my catalyst for changing. And, it meant changing, you might mean changing your friends, which, change your friend group, change who you hang out with, change your habits. But where there's determination, a way can be found. So that's my piece of advice.
I love that. I love
Great
that
advice.
advice. Absolutely. And it is so true and so important and so key. So thank you for that.
Welcome.
Before we wrap up, so how can people get a hold of you? How can they follow you? What's the best thing for them to do there? And what platforms are your podcast on?
Okay, so the best way is you could just go to my website, which is www.suesaller.com. So that's spelled SUESALLER. I'm also on Instagram at thatsuesaller.com. Oh, no, wait a minute. No .com. I'm so used to saying .com on the end
we
of
mess ours
everything.
up all the
Oh my
time too.
gosh. Yeah. There's like everything .com, how are you doing today? No, I'm doing great. .com, so it's at that Sue Saller. I'm on Instagram. I do have a Facebook page as well, Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. You can find it there. I'm also on YouTube, Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. But honestly, if you go to my website, there's a tab that says subscribe. And then when you click on that tab, it has all the different platforms on there. So I'm on Spotify and Anchor, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. There's other ones in there I can't remember.
I'm going to read.
We need to get on all those places.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to this again. The only reason we're not on all those right now is because I have been undisciplined in setting up all the rest of the accounts. So we're just Spotify and Apple Podcasts and YouTube.
You just have to set up the accounts and link the RSS feed. That's all. That's all I did. It's on autopilot.
Yeah.
I don't do anything else with it.
That's the beauty of Apple.
I post once to Anchor, and then Anchor feeds it to everybody else. So
and now,
but Spotify, you can see the videos, which is cool. But the videos are on YouTube. I'm slowly getting them on YouTube also.
Yeah.
So.
And now the cool thing with Spotify for podcasters is they bought Anchor. So it's all one platform now. So I just go there and it puts it on Apple and Spotify. And then I have to manually upload to YouTube because of the video there as well. But yeah.
Manual up to nothing automatically goes to YouTube anyway. You have to manual all that, but it's all good.
Yeah, for sure. So again, thank you so much, Sue, for all of that. So Brian, do you have anything that you wanted to leave everybody with today?
Kind of, the same old, we're all used to spending money on stuff. We're products ourselves. Invest in yourself, invest in that product, and, take yourself to heights that you never would have imagined. Just take the time and invest in yourself.
Yeah. And you can do that with Ideal by talking to us about our coaching program. So we have refined things greatly. We have finalized the framework. It is very heavily focused on becoming the most disciplined version of yourself. We offer 2 packages at 2 different price points in order to help you along the way. So if you're interested, reach out to us. Best way to get a hold of us right now, our website should be done here soon, which is super exciting. But right now is Instagram at ideal _pot. Oh man. Let's rewind.
Check out the banner at the end of the video. It'll scroll across the screen.
At ideal _impact _podcast. That's the best way to get a hold of us. But the ideal impact podcast.com is coming soon, which is, again, we're super excited about. But yeah, and then we have our monthly Connect call. So this month, June 20th, Tuesday from January, from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's a group coaching. We're going to be focused on accountability this month, or this month, and you can look at that as ownership as well. That will be, Brian, you're going to be on that. Randy cannot make it, that one, right?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Everything's better without Randy, honestly, when we think about
it. I miss him. I don't know what you're talking about.
He'll be on the next one because he can talk the
buddy.
Education. Yeah, he can talk the education shop there.
Yeah, he'll definitely have to be on that one with you for sure. And
love it.
Randy, what I was gonna and it's so Randy's favorite of the 5 ideal skills. Mine's discipline, his is accountability, and it does suck that he's not going to be able to make it on June 20th. But what's going to be weird is going to be I'll be at home, so I'm flying home June 19th, so I'll be at home for the next ideal connect, so we can potentially all do that together, which will be pretty cool. That'll be the first time that all three of us will be in the same room.
Yeah.
Sweet.
I was going to add one thing. We were talking about the Connect call. For anybody listening right now, if you tune into the Connect call, I am going to be taking on a client at which will be free of charge. So anybody out there that wants a little bit of coaching, look at our framework, see if it's right for you, listen in. And if you give me the opportunity, I would love to work with you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, it's been awesome, Sue. I know we will be talking soon. Thank you again so much for all the time, so much for opening up, being authentic, sharing all of those things and all of the actionable advice that you provided as well. So thank you for that.
Kyle,
And
it was
Brian,
Kyle.
thanks
Yeah,
for being
Brian. Oh, Kyle, Brian, thank you. It was an honor to be here. Thank you for letting me share my story.
It's a pleasure to have you. And it was awesome to get to know you and get to chat with you today. So thank you.
And since Randy's not here, bye.